The wind didn't howl. It was too cold for that. It scraped across the peaks of the San Juans with the sound of a dull knife drawn over stone. Silas Reeve felt the sound in his teeth. He hunched lower over the saddle horn, pulling the stiff buffalo hide tighter around his neck. His horse, a gray gelding with more grit than sense, labored beneath him, lungs pumping steam into the frozen air. Each step was a gamble against the drifts, a plunge into white nothingness that could hide a hole or a rock. He was tracking a man named Elias Thorne. Thorne was nothing special, just another desperate fool who'd put a bullet in a rancher and his 17-year-old daughter near Pagosa Springs, all for a saddlebag of silver dollars and a rumor of more. Silas didn't care about the silver. He cared about the paper posted in the marshal's office. $500, dead or alive. Alive was cleaner. Dead was usually faster. In this weather, dead was a mercy. For 3 days, Silas had tasted nothing but ice and half-thawed jerky, chewed until his jaw ached. He'd slept under a canvas tarp stiff as pine board, his bedroll frozen to the ground by morning. The cold was a physical weight. It pressed on his chest, seeped into his bones, and made the old ache in his left shoulder burn with a fresh fire. He'd gashed it 2 days back, slipping on an icy ridge while dragging the horse. The bleeding had stopped, mostly, but the cold kept the wound raw, a sharp, stabbing reminder just beneath his coat. He kept his right hand tucked inside his coat, resting on the smooth walnut grip of his revolver. It was the only part of him that felt truly warm. The wilderness was punishing, a white desert that offered no comfort. The snow-lashed peaks looked like broken teeth. The rivers were choked with ice. There was no sign of life, not a rabbit, not a crow, not even the smoke of Thorne's campfire. The fugitive was running south, toward the New Mexico line, but this storm had blindsided them both. Now, it was not a hunt. It was a race against the freeze. Silas was losing. The light was failing, turning the world a deep, bruised purple. When the gelding stopped, head low, refusing to take another step. "Get on, horse!" Silas grated. The words cracked in his throat. The horse only shuddered, a long, rattling breath that signaled the end of its strength. Silas scrubbed the ice from his beard, squinting into the gray swirl. He was about to dismount, to put a bullet in the horse and cut a strip of meat from its flank, when he smelled it. Smoke. It was thin, laced with pine, but it was there. He slid from the saddle, his legs numb and clumsy. He hit the drift hard, sinking to his hip, the pain in his shoulder screaming. He pulled the Colt, the metal so cold it stung his palm even through the leather glove. He checked the load, his thumb moving automatically over the 6 cartridges. He led the horse forward, using the animal as a shield. The snow thinned as he moved into the shelter of a small, boxy canyon. And there it was. It was a homestead, or what was left of one. The main cabin stood, but the barn beside it was a skeleton of charred timbers, black bones sticking up from the snow. The rail fence was splintered, half dragged down, leaning at a drunken angle. It was a place where something terrible had happened. But from the stone chimney, a faint, gray wisp of smoke climbed into the air, lazy and thin, as if apologizing for its own existence. Thorne. It had to be. No sane settler would be clinging to a ruin like this. Silas moved slow, keeping to the deeper drifts, the sound of his own breathing harsh in his ears. He tied the gelding's reins to a broken fence post, leaving the horse to droop in the snow. He approached the cabin from the side, gun raised. The windows were dark, covered over from the inside. He pressed his back to the rough-hewn logs, listening. He heard nothing but the wind and the faint, hungry crackle of a low fire. He moved to the porch. It sagged under his weight, the boards groaning. He raised his fist to hammer on the door, to flush his man out, but the door creaked open before he could strike. It was not Elias Thorne. It was a woman. She held a long-barreled rifle, a Winchester, and she held it steady. The muzzle was aimed square at his chest. "Don't," she said. Her voice was low, rough, but clear. Silas froze. He saw her in the gloom of the doorway. She was tall, thin, swallowed up in a man's woolen coat that was patched at the elbows. Her hair was a dark knot pulled back from her face. Her face was pale, gaunt, with cheekbones sharp as flint. But it was her eyes that held him. They were dark, wide, and absolutely terrified. But the rifle wasn't shaking. "Ma'am," Silas said. His voice was a wreck. "I mean no harm. My horse is done. I saw the smoke." She stared at him, her gaze moving from his face to the Colt in his hand, then back to his face. She seemed to be measuring him. "You're bleeding," she said. It was not an offer of help. It was an observation. Silas looked down. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across the front of his hide coat, melting the snow that clung to it. The gash on his shoulder had opened again. He hadn't even felt it. "It's nothing," he said. "Put the pistol away," she ordered. Silas hesitated. To be unarmed was to be dead. But looking at her, at the hollows under her eyes, he knew she wouldn't shoot him unless he gave her cause. He slowly, deliberately, slid the Colt back into its holster. The rifle barrel did not waver. "I'm just looking for shelter," he said, the words heavy, tasting like a lie. "Just for the night, the storm." The wind chose that moment to rip through the canyon, throwing a sheet of ice pellets against the cabin wall. The woman flinched, her eyes darting toward the darkness behind her. She looked back at Silas. He was half frozen. He was bleeding. She seemed to decide, less of a threat than the night. She stepped back, pulling the door open just wide enough for him to pass. "Come in," she said, "but the rifle stays where I can see it." Silas nodded. He climbed the 2 steps, his legs protesting, and ducked under the low doorway. The cabin was one room. The air inside was cold, but free of the wind. A small, miserable fire burned in a large stone hearth at the far end. The place was almost bare. There was a rough-hewn table, 1 chair, a bed built into the wall, and a few crates. It was clean. Too clean. It was the sterile clean of a place that had been scrubbed of life. The woman bolted the door behind him, the heavy wooden bar sliding home with a sound of finality. She pointed the rifle toward the hearth. "Sit by the fire." Silas did as he was told, sinking onto a low stool that looked like it would break under his weight. The warmth from the fire was weak, but it was enough to make the pain in his shoulder flare into a hot agony. He gritted his teeth, pulling off his frozen gloves. The woman stayed by the door, watching him. "Who are you tracking?" she asked. Silas looked up, surprised. "What makes you think I'm tracking?" "No one else comes through here," she said, her voice flat. "Not unless they're running from something, or hunting something. You look like the hunter." Silas said nothing. He offered no answers. He unbuttoned the hide coat, his fingers clumsy and numb. The wool shirt beneath was soaked through with blood. The woman watched him struggle for a long moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, she leaned the rifle against the wall by the door, where she could reach it. "Keep your hands where I can see them," she said. She walked to the hearth, picked up a kettle, and poured water into a tin pot, hanging it over the fire. Their conversation was tense, brittle. She asked no more questions. He offered no more answers. She went to a chest, took out a strip of clean cotton cloth and a small brown bottle. She knelt beside him, placing the items on the floor. "Shirt," she said. He looked at her, mistrustful. "It will fester if you do not clean it," she said, impatient. "Take it off." Slowly, Silas worked the wet wool shirt off his shoulders, biting back a groan as the fabric pulled at the raw wound. The cold air hit his skin. He was covered in old scars, pale lines on his chest and arms. The new wound was an ugly, purple gash, 4 inches long, deep and ragged. She looked at it without flinching. She uncorked the bottle. "This will sting." She poured the whiskey straight into the cut. Silas hissed, his whole body clenching. Fire shot down his arm and up his neck. He saw white spots dance in front of his eyes. "Hold still," she commanded. She dipped a cloth in the hot water from the kettle, her hands moving with a swift, impersonal efficiency. She cleaned the wound, her touch firm, careful. He could smell the lye soap on her skin. He watched her face in the firelight. She was younger than he first thought. Maybe 25, maybe less, but her eyes were old. They carried a kind of watching sorrow, the look of someone who has stared too long at an empty horizon. When she was done, she wrapped the cotton tight around his shoulder and arm, tying it off. "Thank you," he mumbled. She nodded, gathering the soiled rags, and stood up. She went to the pot hanging over the fire and ladled a thin, watery soup into a wooden bowl. It smelled of rabbit and onions. She handed it to him, along with a spoon. He took it. The warmth of the bowl seeped into his hands. He ate, the hot liquid scalding his throat, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. She did not eat. She sat in the single chair at the table, watching the doorway, her hands folded in her lap. The rifle was close by. When he finished, he set the bowl on the hearth. "My name is Silas Reeve," he said. It felt wrong to take her food and offer nothing, not even his name. She gave a small, jerky nod. Evelyn Ashcroft." "This place," Silas started, gesturing to the cabin. "It was my father's," she said, cutting him off. Her voice was sharp, a warning. Silas shut his mouth. He leaned back against the cold stone, the fire warming his front, the cold from the wall seeping into his back. He felt the exhaustion of the last 3 days settle over him like a burial shroud. "I'll leave at first light," he said, his voice heavy. "I appreciate the soup. The bandage." Evelyn said nothing. She just stared at the bolted door, as if expecting something to come through it. The silence in the cabin stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rising shriek of the wind outside. The ache in her silence was palpable. It was a loneliness so deep it felt like a third person in the room, a cold specter sitting between them. Silas dozed, his hand resting on his holstered gun, his sleep shallow and wary. He woke hours later. The fire burned down to glowing embers. The cabin was dark. He knew instantly that he was not leaving at first light. The wind was a solid wall of sound, a high-pitched scream. Against the window, he could hear the steady, dry hiss of snow piling high against the glass. They were being buried. He sat up. The pain in his shoulder was a dull throb. In the faint red glow of the coals, he saw her. Evelyn was standing by the hearth, a dark shape against the dying light. She was staring into the embers. She had taken off the heavy coat and was wearing only a thin dress, threadbare and pale. It might have been a nightgown, or perhaps it was the only dress she had left. Her bare feet were stark against the dark plank floor. He saw her shiver, a violent, rattling tremor that shook her whole frame. She knew he was awake. He could feel her awareness, but she did not turn. "You should be in bed," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "You'll freeze standing there." She was quiet for a long time. The wind moaned, rattling the door in its frame. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. She turned to look at him. Her face was a mask of shadows, her eyes 2 dark pools of misery. He saw now that the cabin was not just empty. It was desolate. There was no sign of her parents, no sign of anyone. The pegs on the wall held no coats. The shelves held only a few tins. The place was not just barely livable. It was a tomb. She was a ghost tending a grave. She took a step toward him, then another. She stopped just out of his reach. "You can have the bed," she said, her voice thin, brittle. "I am used to the floor." "No," Silas said. "I'll take the floor." She shook her head, a small, desperate motion. She looked at the floor, at the dying fire, at him. He saw the sheen of tears on her cheeks, catching the faint ember light. She was not making an offer of comfort. She was making a plea. "Take everything I have," she said, so softly he barely heard her over the storm. She laid down her pride, her shame, and her sorrow at his feet. It was not a seduction. It was not a bargain for protection. It was the last, desperate act of a woman who had nothing else to give. A plea to feel something human, even if it was just the weight of another person. A buffer against the crushing, absolute zero of her isolation. Silas looked at her. He saw the fine bones of her neck, the hollows of her throat. He saw the tremor in her hands. He was a man who had lived on the frontier, a man who took what he needed, a man haunted by blood and violence. He had not known the touch of a woman in more time than he could count. But he saw the sorrow. He saw the shattering loneliness in her eyes, a mirror of the cold waste he carried inside himself. He did not touch her. He reached for a log, the last one by the hearth, and placed it carefully on the coals. Sparks showered up, bright and fleeting, illuminating her tear-streaked face. He pushed the stool back, and slowly, his wounded shoulders stiff, he sat down on the rough floor, his back against the stone of the hearth. He left a space beside him. Evelyn watched him, her breath catching in a small, broken sob. The offer hung in the air, unanswered, unchanged. Silas did not look at her. He stared at the new flames licking at the log. After a long minute, she sank to the floor. She did not sit beside him, not touching. She sat a few feet away, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping her thin arms around her legs. Silas pulled his buffalo hide from where it lay steaming by the fire and, reaching across the space between them, draped it over her small, trembling shoulders. She flinched at the movement, but took the coat, pulling it tight. Neither of them spoke. They sat beside each other, two strangers trapped by the storm, listening to the wind try to tear the cabin from the earth. Outside, the snow drifted against the glass, piling up like a shroud, burying the world, burying them both. The storm did not pass. It settled over the canyon like a judgment, sealing them in. For 3 days, the world was reduced to the 4 walls of the cabin and the screaming white void beyond the windows. The wind was a living thing, a predator scratching at the door, moaning down the chimney, shaking the very logs of the house. The snow piled up, burying the porch, creeping halfway up the glass. The light inside the cabin was gray and thin, a dim, underwater light that seemed to drain the color from everything. They lived in a small, tense orbit around the hearth. The silence was heavier than the snow. That first night had left a strange mark on the air. His refusal of her desperate offer was a thing unspoken, a space of respect, or perhaps just pity, that hung between them. It made them strangers all over again, but of a different kind. They avoided each other's eyes. Their life became a routine of small, necessary tasks. In the gray morning, Silas would rise first from the floor, his body stiff, the pain in his shoulder a dull, cold ache. He would break the ice in the water bucket with his fist. Evelyn, from the bed, would turn her back, dressing beneath the blankets before rising to rekindle the fire. Their world shrank to the immediate: wood, water, food. The woodpile, a small stack on the porch, was dwindling. On the second day, Silas bundled himself in his hide coat, took the axe from the wall, and unbolted the door. It took his full weight to push it open against the drift. He was gone for an hour, fighting his way to the skeletal remains of the barn, where he split and chopped frozen timbers, the sound of the axe flat and dead in the thick, falling snow. When he returned, he was caked in ice, the raw gash on his shoulder weeping through the bandage. Evelyn was waiting. She took the wood from him, her fingers brushing his, and he saw they were red and raw with chill. She said nothing as she bolted the door behind him. They rationed the food. The rabbit soup was gone. They had a half-full sack of flour, a tin of salt, a handful of dried beans, And some coffee. His coffee. Evelyn added a few withered onions she pulled from a box under the bed. They ate twice a day. She would make a thin gruel, or bake small, hard cakes of bread on the hearthstone. They did not talk. The scrape of a spoon in the wooden bowl was loud. The crackle of the fire was a roar. They were two animals trapped in a den, wary, quiet, listening to the world freeze. On the third night, the wind quieted, but the snow kept falling, thick and silent. The quiet was worse. It left too much room for thought. Silas sat on the stool, cleaning his revolver. He worked with methodical care, the oiled rag moving over the cylinder, the metallic click-click-click the only sound. Evelyn sat at the table, mending a tear in her thin dress with clumsy stitches, her head bowed. The firelight cast deep shadows under her cheekbones. He was a banker, she said. Silas stopped, his hand still. He did not look up. My father, she continued, her voice small, aimed at the rough plank table. In Selridge, that's the town, east of here. He was an important man, or he thought he was. Silas set the cylinder on the hearthstone. He waited. He knew this kind of quiet. It was the quiet before a confession, before the spilling of a hurt that had been held too long. We had a big house, white, with columns. My mother planted roses all along the drive. I had dresses. I had books. She stabbed the needle into the fabric, her knuckles white. I was promised to a man, Henry. His father owned the freight line. She fell silent, her hands twisting the fabric in her lap. When the war came, she whispered, everything changed. The town was split, half for the Union, half for the South. My father, he just wanted the town to survive. He did business with both sides. He gave loans to men heading west, men the Union Army said were enemies, collaborators. She laughed, a short, dry sound, like stones rattling in a tin cup. He wasn't a traitor, he was just a banker. He saw coin, not uniforms, but when the Union soldiers came through, someone told them, someone pointed a finger at our house. Silas watched the fire. He had seen towns like that, towns eaten alive from the inside by suspicion. They took him. They marched him down the main street. They accused him of treason. He did not survive the jail. Her voice thickened, broke. She did not weep, but she stopped speaking, swallowing hard against the memory. They took the bank, she said, after a minute. Then the house. They said it was for the war effort, for reparations, but it was just theft. Our friends, the people who ate at our table. They crossed the street when my mother and I walked by. They threw rocks at our windows. They called us traitors, copperheads. Silas slid the cylinder back into the frame of the revolver. It clicked shut, heavy and final. Henry, she said, her voice laced with a cold, old anger. The man I was to marry, he came to the house, what was left of it. He did not come inside. He stood on the porch and told me he could not, in good conscience, marry the daughter of a traitor. He said his family's reputation was at stake. She looked up then, her dark eyes finding his in the dim light. He was a coward. They were all cowards. My mother, she faded. She was like one of her roses cut in winter. She died 6 months later. Pneumonia. The doctor said, but it was shame. It was a broken heart. My brother, James, he was younger. He couldn't take it. He ran, west or south, I don't know. He just left. And you? Silas asked, his voice rough. I stayed, she said. She looked down at her hands, at the mended dress. This was all that was left, this homestead. My father bought it for the land, thought he'd raise horses. It was just a shell. I came here. I had nowhere else to go. The town. They were glad to see me gone. They say I'm cursed, that I ruined a good man, that I drove my family to ruin. They are happy to have someone to blame. She finished her story. The cabin was utterly silent. Silas had nothing to offer. He had no words of comfort. He had seen this story a dozen times, written in burned-out farms and empty eyes. The war had left scars on everyone, inside and out. He said nothing. He simply finished cleaning his gun, stood up, and put it back in its holster. The next morning, the fourth morning, the snow had stopped. A weak, pale sun showed itself, making the drifts glitter. The world was blindingly white. Silas went out again, this time with his rifle. The air was so cold it stung his lungs. His horse, huddled in the ruin of the barn, looked half dead, but it was alive. He had shared his own scant rations of hardtack with the animal. He spent hours checking the few crude snares Evelyn had set near the tree line. They were empty. He moved further, into the deep quiet of the pine forest, his boots sinking deep. He was a hunter. He knew how to read the silence. He found what he was looking for, a single rabbit, frozen stiff in one of his own wire loops he'd set the day before. It was not much, but it was meat. When he returned to the cabin, Evelyn was on the porch, sweeping snow away from the door with a worn-out broom. She looked up, saw the rabbit dangling from his hand, and her shoulders, held so stiff and proud, seemed to slump in relief. Inside, he skinned and dressed the animal while she boiled water. Later, as the cabin filled with the first good smell it had held in days, he noticed the wind catching one of the window shutters. It was loose, banging a steady, hollow rhythm against the log wall. He went outside, into the knee-deep snow. He found the shutter. The leather hinge was torn. He took out his knife, cut a strip of hide from his own saddlebag, and, with numb fingers, worked the stiff leather, refastening the shutter until it was tight and silent. It was a small thing. When he came back in, chilled to the bone, Evelyn was waiting. She had taken the last of his coffee grounds, boiled them, and poured the black, bitter liquid into his tin cup. She held it out to him. He looked at the cup, then at her. He had been hoarding those grounds. They were his last comfort. "You need it more," he said, moving toward the fire. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You did. Thank you. For the shutter." He stopped. He took the cup. Their fingers touched. Hers were cold. He drank. The coffee was scalding hot, strong, and it felt like life. That night, they ate the rabbit stew. It was thin, but it was warm. They ate in their usual silence, but the air had changed. The tension had eased, replaced by a shared, weary truce. After, they sat by the fire. The storm was over. The cold had settled in. Silas knew he would be leaving soon. The thought left a strange, hollow feeling in his gut. "Mr. Reeve?" she asked, her voice soft. "Silas." "Silas," she tried. "They hunt you too, don't they?" He looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "The way you watch the door," she said. "The way you sleep. You sleep with your hand on your gun. You are not just a hunter. You are hunted." Silas stared into the fire. The flames danced, showing him pictures he did not want to see. Mud and smoke and the sound of men screaming. "I fought in the war," he said, his voice flat. He did not say which side. It did not matter. "I did things. We all did. When it was over, there was nothing to go back to. The man I was, he burned up. This," he gestured to his gun, "to the worn clothes, is what was left. I killed," he said. He wanted her to know. He wanted her to see him clearly, not as the man who fixed her shutter, but as the man who had come bleeding to her door. "I killed more than I care to count, for a flag, for food, for nothing at all. And I found out I was good at it." He tossed a small chip of wood into the fire. It smoked, then flared bright. "Now, I hunt men for coin. Men like the one I'm tracking. Bad men. But the line, it gets thin. Sometimes the men hunting you are no better than the men you're hunting, and sometimes you're not much better yourself." He looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was no fear in them. There was only a deep, sad understanding. She knew what it meant to be judged. She knew what it meant to be an outcast. "You are not like them," she whispered. "Aren't I?" he asked. The next morning, the world was still. The sun was bright. The great thaw had begun. Water dripped from the eaves. It was time to go. Silas checked his wound. Evelyn had cleaned it well. The skin was puckered and healing, the raw red fading. He moved his arm. Testing it, it held. He gathered his sparse belongings, his bedroll, the small sack with his coffee tin, a whetstone. Evelyn watched him, her hands clasped in front of her. "The horse," he said. "In the barn," she replied. I gave him the last of the oats." He nodded, a sharp dip of his chin. He pulled on his hide coat, settled his hat, and grabbed his rifle. He walked to the door. She did not follow him. He waded through the heavy, wet snow to the ruined barn. The gelding was weak, but it whinnied softly when it saw him. He spent a long time with the horse, checking its legs, brushing the caked ice from its coat. He saddled it, his movements slow, deliberate. He was stalling. He did not want to go back into that cabin. He did not want to see her face. It was easier to leave a stranger. When the horse was ready, he let it out into the bright, melting snow. Evelyn was standing on the porch, just as she had been. She was wearing the patched man's coat. She held nothing in her hands. He led the horse to the porch. He stopped, looking up at her. The silence stretched. What was there to say? "Thank you for the shelter. I am sorry for your father. Be safe." The words were small and useless. "Evelyn," he began. He never finished. His gaze lifted, past her, to the horizon, miles south, down the canyon, where the land flattened out toward the New Mexico line. A thin, dark pillar of smoke was rising against the bright blue sky. It was not the wide, lazy smoke of a chimney. It was the tight, bundled smoke of a small, hot campfire. He went still. His eyes narrowed. The man who fixed shutters was gone. The hunter was back. Elias Thorne. The fugitive had survived the storm. He was holed up, careless, thinking he was safe, thinking the world was still frozen. Silas grabbed the saddle horn and swung himself up. The horse grunted at the sudden weight. He looked down at Evelyn. Her face was a question. He pointed, his gloved fingers sharp. "Smoke, south. It's the man I'm after." Her eyes widened. She understood. He had not been looking for shelter. He had been hunting, and the thing he was hunting was close. You're going." "I am," he said. He gathered the reins. He looked at her, at the small, proud figure standing alone on the porch of a burned-out life. He had brought the danger of his world to her doorstep. "Go inside," he commanded, his voice hard, the way it was when he'd first arrived. "Bolt the door. Put the bar down. Do not open it. Not for anyone." "But will you—" "Don't wait," he said. "Stay inside. Keep that rifle loaded." He did not know if he would come back. He did not know if Thorne was alone. He did not know if he was riding to a $500 bounty or to a bullet in the gut. And in that moment, it did not much matter. It was just what he did. He turned the gelding, the horse slipping in the wet snow. He did not look back. He kicked the horse into a slow, steady walk, his eyes fixed on the distant smoke, his right hand resting on the walnut grip of his gun. Evelyn Ashcroft stood on the porch and watched him go. She watched until he was just a dark shape against the blinding white snow. Then she turned, went inside, and dropped the heavy wooden bar across the door. The ride south was a study in wet misery. The thaw had turned the world to slush and mud. Water dripped from every pine bough. A steady, cold rain that soaked through Silas's hide coat and found the fresh bandage on his shoulder. The horse slipped and labored, its breath pluming. Silas kept his eyes on the smoke. It was a fool's fire. Too thick, too dark. Elias Thorne was either stupid or he was careless. Or, Silas reasoned, he was not alone. He was with men who felt safe in their numbers. That was the most likely. He followed the canyon as it wound down from the high peaks, the rock walls closing in, the air growing still. The smoke was coming from a cleft in the canyon wall, a boxy side canyon hidden by a stand of aspen. Silas dismounted, tying the gelding to a low-hanging branch where it was hidden from the trail. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard, checked the load, and moved forward on foot. His boots sank into the wet, cold mulch of the forest floor. He moved slow, not a sound, his eyes scanning. The smell of the fire grew stronger, mixed with the sharp tang of whiskey and the foul smell of unwashed men. He heard a voice, a harsh laugh, and he froze. He eased himself behind a granite boulder and looked. It was an old church. It stood in a small, muddy clearing, a crumbling adobe relic from when the Spanish had tried to claim these mountains. The roof was half gone, the cross on its crooked steeple long since fallen, but the walls were thick, and the door was solid. Thorne was inside, and he was not alone. "I tell you, he near soiled himself," a rough voice boomed, followed by laughter. "The old man. When I pointed the scattergun—" "Shut up! Amos!" a second voice snapped. "Just drink. Thorne, you got any more of that jerky?" "In the bag," a third voice said. That was him, Elias Thorne. His voice was thin, reedy. Silas settled, resting his rifle on the rock. 3 of them. He was one man, with a sore shoulder and a tired horse. The bounty was for Thorne. The paper said nothing about his friends. He could wait for Thorne to come out. But the cold was seeping into him. The wet ground was chilling him to the bone. He could not wait long. And if they found his horse— He listened. They sounded like deserters, men who had shed their blue or gray uniforms and found a new trade in cruelty. They were armed, and they were cruel. The way they spoke of the rancher and his daughter, the casual, bragging tone, made something cold and hard tighten in Silas's chest. He was not going to wait. He shifted, moving from the rock to the cover of the church wall, his back sliding against the cold, damp adobe. He moved toward the front. The heavy plank door was slightly ajar. He could hear them clearly now, arguing over the whiskey. He put his hand on the door. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He kicked it open. The door slammed back against the wall with a crack like thunder. "Elias Thorne," Silas bellowed, leveling the rifle. "Warrant from Pagosa. Come out slow." For a second, there was silence. 3 faces, bearded and stunned, looked up from their fire. Then, chaos. The big one, Amos, roared and grabbed a shotgun. The jumpy one went for his hip. Thorne just dove, scrambling behind a fallen church pew. Silas fired the rifle. The shot echoed in the small space, a deafening blast. The jumpy one grabbed his chest, his eyes wide, and fell backward into the fire. There was a terrible hiss, a smell of burning wool. A shotgun blast answered. Pellets ripped through the air where Silas had been, but he was already moving, diving low, rolling behind the rotting altar. Wood chips exploded from the old carving. Silas dropped the rifle and drew his Colt. He came up low. Amos was reloading, fumbling with shells. Silas shot him twice. The big man staggered, looked down at his stomach, and then crashed forward, the shotgun clattering on the stone floor. 2 down. "Thorne!" Silas yelled, his voice ragged. "It's over!" He heard a sound, not a surrender, a scrape. He darted from behind the altar, keeping low. Thorne was not there. The back wall of the church had crumbled, leaving a ragged hole. Thorne was gone, scrambling up the muddy hillside, Silas ran to the hole, leveling his pistol. "Stop!" Thorn kept running, slipping, clawing his way up the bank. Silas aimed, his hand steady. He was about to squeeze the trigger when a shot exploded from his left. He had not seen the third man. He had miscounted. There were 4. Or the third man had returned. No, it was Thorn. He had run, but he'd had a second gun. He was firing back as he fled. Silas felt it before he heard it. A white-hot poker, driven straight through his left thigh. The force of it spun him around. His leg vanished. It was just gone, replaced by a sudden, blinding fire. He collapsed, his pistol skittering away. He tried to stand, but the leg would not hold him. It was useless. He gritted his teeth, looking at the ragged hole in his trousers. Blood. There was so much blood. It was pulsing out, dark and hot, steaming in the cold air. He heard Thorn crashing through the trees, making his escape. "Damn it," Silas whispered. He looked at the 2 dead men in the church. One was smoking in the fire. The other lay in a spreading pool of his own blood. Silas crawled, the pain in his leg a bright, screaming agony. He grabbed his pistol. He pulled himself out of the church, into the cold, clean air. Thorn was gone. The third man, the one who escaped, was gone. He was alone. He was bleeding out. He tore his neckerchief off, his hands shaking. He fumbled with the clasp of his belt, pulled it free, and wrapped it high and tight around his thigh, just below the groin. He cinched it, grunting, using the pistol barrel to twist it, to make a tourniquet. The pain was so vast it made him gag, but the pulsing flow of blood slowed to a sluggish ooze. He had to get to his horse. He began to crawl. He dragged the useless leg through the mud and slush. Every movement sent shards of white fire up into his spine. The world started to tilt. The trees blurred. He kept his eyes on the ground, focusing on one foot, then the next. He reached the gelding. The horse whinnied, its eyes wide, smelling the blood. "Easy, boy," Silas slurred. He tried to pull himself up. He got his hand on the saddle horn, but his arms had no strength. He fell back into the slush. He lay there, looking at the gray sky. He was going to die here, in the mud, outside a ruined church, with 2 dead men he'd just killed. It was a fitting end. He thought of Evelyn, bolted in her cabin, waiting. "No," he growled. He used the stirrup. He put his good foot in, grabbed the horse's mane with both hands, and hauled himself up, screaming into the horse's neck as his wounded leg banged against its side. He almost blacked out from the sheer, bright agony of it. He slumped over the saddle, clinging to the horn. "Home, horse," he gasped, though he did not know if the horse knew the way. "Get home." He gave the horse its head, the gelding. Sensing the urgency, the smell of death, began to move, picking its way back down the canyon, back toward the only other life it knew. Silas drifted. He was on a river of fire. He saw Sarah, her face in the flames. He saw the men he had killed. He saw Evelyn, standing on the porch, her eyes old. He did not know how long he rode. He only knew pain and the steady, rocking motion of the horse. Then he was falling. The ground came up to meet him. It was soft. It was white, snow. He had made it back to the high ground. He smelled pine. He was close. He tried to get up. He could not move. The world was dark at the edges. He heard a sound, a door, groaning. He looked up. A figure, a dark shape against the snow. Evelyn. She ran toward him, clumsy in the deep snow, her dark hair coming undone, flying around her face. She fell to her knees beside him. "Silas! Oh God, Silas!" She had heard the shots. She had seen his horse, standing riderless by the barn. "Inside," he managed to say. His lips were numb. She grabbed him under the arms. "Get up! You have to help me!" He tried. He failed. "I cannot carry you," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. He saw the fear in her eyes, the same terror he'd seen the first night, but this was different. This was fear for him. "Drag me," he whispered. And she did. She hooked her arms under his and she pulled. She was strong, stronger than she looked. She strained, her boots slipping, her breath sobbing in her chest. She dragged him, inch by inch, foot by foot, leaving a thick dark trail of blood in the snow. She got him onto the porch, through the door. The sound of the heavy bar sliding home was the sound of the world shutting out. He was on the floor, by the hearth. He was shivering, his teeth chattering, though he felt like he was on fire. "The leg," he managed. The belt, too long." She saw the bloody belt high on his thigh. She understood. "Eve," she said, "your knife. Get it, heat it, in the fire." "What? No." "Do it," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "The bleeding. It won't stop. You have to close it." She looked at him, her face white with horror. Then she ran to the small box where she kept her kitchen things. She pulled out a skinning knife. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it. She picked it up and plunged the blade into the heart of the fire, holding it there until the steel began to glow a dull red. He had unbuckled the belt. The blood, freed, began to well up again. "Now," he said. She knelt over him. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. "I cannot." "You must," he said, "or I will die right here." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed the glowing blade flat against the ragged, open hole in his thigh. Silas screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, animal noise of pure agony that tore from his throat. His back arched off the floor. Evelyn screamed with him, holding the knife down, the smell of burned meat and blood filling her nose, making her heave. Then he went limp. He was unconscious. The bleeding had stopped. For 5 days, he did not wake. He lived in the gray world, in the fever. He was in the war, the mud thick on his boots. He was in the fire, choking on smoke. Reaching for Sarah's hand, he cried out, names she did not know. Evelyn did not leave his side. She was no longer shaking. She was a different woman. She was a guardian. She bathed him, cleaning the sweat and grime from his skin. She tore up her last good sheet for bandages. She forced broth, and later, a thin gruel past his lips. She sat in the chair, the rifle across her lap, watching him breathe, watching the door, listening to the wilderness. The cabin was a fortress. She was its only soldier. On the 6th day, the fever broke. He woke up. The first thing he saw was the ceiling, the familiar rough-hewn beams. He smelled wood smoke. He felt nothing, just a deep, hollow ache. He turned his head. Evelyn was asleep in the chair, her head slumped forward, her hair a wild tangle. She looked exhausted, gaunt, but she was there. The rifle was leaning against the chair, within her reach. He tried to move his leg. The pain was instant, a dull, heavy throb, but it was not the fire of before. He was alive. "Evelyn," he rasped. Her head snapped up, her eyes, blurred with sleep, focused on him. A look of such profound, exhausted relief washed over her face that it struck him harder than the bullet. "Silas," she breathed. She scrambled to his side, touching his forehead. "The fever, it's gone." He started. "I did what you said," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "It was terrible." "You saved me," he said. It was a simple fact. They fell into a new routine, the routine of recovery. He was weak, helpless. He hated it, but she tended to him with a quiet, fierce possessiveness. She helped him sit up. She fed him. She changed the bandages on the burned, healing wound. Their intimacy deepened, but it was not of the body. It was of the sick room. It was the quiet of the early hours. The shared worry over a dwindling food supply. The long stretches of silence where they just looked at each other. One night, the fire was low. He was propped up on the pillows. She was sitting on the floor, staring into the coals. "When you were gone," she said, her voice barely audible. "When I heard the guns, I thought, if you died, I would be alone again." She looked at him, her face full of a truth she had never spoken. "Before you came, Silas, I was not just living here. I was waiting. I told myself I was surviving, but I was just waiting to die. The loneliness was so big. It ate everything. I used to hold my father's pistol, just hold it, feel the weight of it." She shook her head, a small, violent motion. "I thought I wanted to die. I prayed for it. And then you fell on my porch, bleeding, and you were so alive, even half dead. You were more alive than I was. You gave me something to do. You gave me a reason to lock the door." He listened, the words settling in the quiet room. He knew that feeling, the waiting, the emptiness. "You remind me of someone," he said, his voice low. She looked up. Her name was Sarah, a long time ago, before the war. He told her. He told her about the farm, about the life he was supposed to have. He told her about the raid. Bushwhackers, not soldiers, just men who like to burn. I was gone, buying seed. When I got back, the house was gone, just fire. And she was inside. His voice grew thick. He had not said these words in 10 years. "I tried to get in. The roof. It was coming down. I could hear her, just for a second. And then nothing. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save her." He closed his eyes, the guilt as fresh and hot as the wound on his leg. "I have been running ever since, hunting men like them, thinking if I killed enough of them, it would, I don't know, pay for it, but it never does." Evelyn watched him, her own pain a quiet echo of his. She understood. His guilt, her shame. They were two sides of the same ruined coin. Another night passed. The cold had returned, a deep, penetrating cold that the small fire could not fight. Silas was in the bed. Evelyn was on her pallet on the floor, shivering. He could hear her teeth chatter. "Evelyn," he said into the dark. "Yes." "You're freezing. Take the bed. I can manage the floor." "No, you cannot. Your leg." "Then, come here, on top of the blankets. There is no sense in both of us freezing." He heard her hesitate, the rustle of her blanket. This was not the desperate offer of that first night. This was not the clinical touch of a nurse. This was something else. She stood, a shadow in the dim room, and brought her blanket. She did not lie with her back to him. She lay on top of the covers, stiff, her face toward him. They were inches apart. They lay in the dark, listening to the wind, listening to each other breathe. "Silas?" she whispered. "I'm here." She moved, just slightly. Her hand, cold, found his. Her fingers were trembling. She leaned in. Her kiss was trembling, unsure. It was clumsy. It was not the kiss of passion. It was the kiss of someone forgetting how it tasted of salt and wood smoke, and a loneliness so deep it made his chest ache. He kissed her back. He felt the tension in her, the lifetime of fear and pride. And then, slowly, desperately, they came together. It was not passion. It was comfort. It was a fumbling, quiet, desperate need to feel something other than pain, other than cold. It was two broken souls clinging to each other in the dark, trying to find a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was slow. It was sad. It was, in its own way, holy. After they lay tangled in the blankets, the cabin was silent. He held her, her head tucked under his chin. He could feel her breath, warm, against his chest. She did not weep. She was still. she whispered, so low he almost did not hear it. "I don't care what you've done. Silas, I don't care." He closed his eyes, tight. He did not answer. He could not. He just held her, his hand gripping her shoulder, as the first true thing he had felt in a decade, a terrible, painful gratitude, welled up in his throat and almost broke free. The land changed. The great white silence of the winter broke, giving way to the sound of a world waking up, wet and angry. The snow retreated from the walls of the cabin, leaving behind a thick, sucking mud that smelled of rot and pine. The creek in the canyon roared, brown and full of debris. Spring was not a gentle arrival. It was a violent thaw, an unraveling. Silas unraveled with it. His leg healed with a raw, ugly scar that pulled the skin tight. The burn Evelyn had given him was a dark, puckered mark, a brand. He began to walk, first with a crude crutch he fashioned from a branch, then without, limping heavily, his teeth gritted. He sat on the porch, watching the snow melt, his restlessness a palpable thing. He was a man made for the horizon, and he had been staring at the same four walls for weeks. He cleaned his guns until the metal shone. He sharpened his knife. He watched Evelyn move about the cabin, her presence a strange mix of comfort and complication. What they had done in the dark, in the cold, had changed the air between them. It was not love. It was something more desperate, a shared secret. But with the light and the thaw, that secret felt heavy. The quiet between them was no longer companionable. It was strained. He was well enough to ride. The gelding, having survived on peeled bark and what little grain Evelyn had saved, was thin but strong. The world was open again. One morning, he watched her trying to hoe a small patch of ground near the porch. The mud was too thick. The work was back-breaking. She was thin, her dress hanging on her face set in the same expression of grim endurance. He limped over to her. "That ground won't take," he said. She did not look up, just kept attacking the earth. "It has to—" "Evelyn—" She stopped, leaning on the hoe, breathing hard. She looked up, her eyes wary. "I'm leaving," he said. It was not cruel, just a fact. "I need to get to Selridge, to file on that bounty. The two I killed, that's coin." She nodded, her face betraying nothing. "I see." "Come with me," he said, the words coming out before he had fully formed them. "This place, it's a grave. You said it yourself. There's nothing here but mud and bad memories. You can't survive another winter here." Her face hardened. She looked away from him, toward the ruined barn. "Go to Selridge, and do what? Be the town disgrace? The traitor's daughter? No!" "You can start over, get a room, find work." "Work?" She laughed, that same dry, brittle sound he hated. "What work? Mending, cleaning? For the same people who threw rocks at my mother? I will not bow to them." "So you'll stay here and bow to this?" he argued, kicking at the mud. "You'll starve. You'll freeze. You call this living? This is hiding. It's no different from what your father's pistol offered." The words hit her like a slap. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, hot fury. "You have no right," she hissed. "You have no right to say that. You, who brings death to my door. You, who uses me." "Use you?" Silas stepped back, stung. I kept you alive. You kept me alive. That was the bargain." "Bargain?" Her voice cracked. "You think that is what that was, a bargain? You are just like him, just like Henry. You find what you want, you take it, and when it is not convenient anymore, you tell me to go to town. You tell me to find work." "That is not what I meant." "What did you mean? Silas? Did you think you would just ride away? After everything? Or did you think you would take me to Selridge and—" "What? Keep me in a room for your comfort, like some saloon girl?" "Evelyn, stop. You are twisting it." He was angry now, his own pride wounded. "I am trying to help you. You are hiding from life. You are letting them win. You are letting them keep you buried here." "And you are running," she threw back. "You run from your own ghosts, so you have no room to talk about mine. You came here. You took my food. You took my shelter. You took what I offered, and now you are healed. So you will ride away, just like my brother did, just like Henry did. Everyone leaves." "I am not them," he roared, the sudden volume of his voice shocking them both. "You are," she screamed, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face. "You are a man. You see a broken thing and you use it until you are done with it. Go to Selridge. Get your coin. I hope you find Elias Thorne. I hope he puts another bullet in you." She threw the hoe down. It splattered in the mud. She ran inside the cabin, slamming the door, the bar dropping with a heavy, final thud. Silas stood in the mud, his hands clenched, his leg text cut off. He stood in the mud, his hands clenched, his leg throbbing. The air felt cold again. He had seen her pride, her sorrow, her fear, but he had never seen her rage. It was the rage of the trapped, the abandoned, and it was aimed entirely at him. He did not try to go inside. He went to the barn, his limp more pronounced. He spent the rest of the day with his horse, methodically checking the saddle, the bridle, mending a split in the leather. He worked until his hands were raw and his shoulder ached. He did not want to admit that her words had hit their mark. He was running. He was always running. And she was right. He had used her. He had taken the warmth she offered, the life she had poured into him, and his first instinct upon healing was to get back to the only life he knew. That night, he slept in the barn. He lay in the cold, musty hay, his bedroll beneath him. He stared into the dark, listening to the drip of the thaw. He thought of her, alone in the cabin, on the bed they had shared. The space between the barn and the house felt as wide as the whole damn territory. He was a fool. He was a bounty hunter. He had no business with a woman like her, a woman with roots, even if they were poisoned. He was all dust and wind. In the morning, before the sun had hit the canyon floor, he was gone. He saddled the gelding in the gray half-light. He did not look toward the cabin. He did not see if there was smoke from the chimney. He rode to the porch. He dismounted, his legs stiff. He reached into his coat, into the oilskin pouch where he kept his savings. He pulled out a small, heavy stack of coins. Double eagles, gold. Nearly everything he had, save for what he needed for supplies. He opened the door, quiet. She was not in the bed. She was asleep in the chair by the cold hearth, the rifle across her lap, just as she had been when he was in the fever. She looked worn out, her face pale, tear tracks dried on her cheeks. His chest felt tight. He looked at her, so small and fierce, and he felt a wave of something. It was not love. It was a deep, aching pity, mixed with a respect that hurt. She deserved better than this. She deserved better than him. He gently, silently, placed the stack of coins on the table. It was not payment. It was, he did not know what it was. Atonement, a grub stake, a goodbye. He backed out of the cabin, pulling the door shut with a soft click. He mounted his horse, and without looking back, he rode down the muddy trail, out of the canyon, and east toward Selridge. Ekelifin woke to the sound of his leaving. It was not a sound at all, but the absence of one. The cabin felt hollow. She had been sleeping with one ear open for so long, listening for his breathing, that the silence was what woke her. She sat up, her neck stiff. The rifle slid onto her lap. The hearth was cold. "Silas," she whispered. She knew. She got up and went to the door. It was unlocked. She pulled it open. The porch was empty. The barn was empty. The muddy tracks of his horse led down the canyon, already filling with water. He was gone. She stood in the doorway, the cold morning air hitting her thin dress. She felt nothing, just a vast, cold, empty space inside her, the space he had filled. She turned back inside, and she saw it. The stack of gold coins on the table, gleaming in the weak morning light. She stared at it. She did not move for a long time. She saw Henry standing on her porch, refusing to come in. She saw her father, his face ruined by shame. She saw Silas, his eyes dark, his touch desperate. And then she saw the money, the payment, the price of her food, her shelter, her body, the price of her nursing him back from the dead. He had paid her like a whore. The cold emptiness vanished, replaced by a fire so hot it choked her. A low, guttural sound tore from her throat. It was the sound of the last string snapping. She stalked to the table, her hands sweeping out, scattering the heavy gold coins across the plank floor. They rolled, spinning, into the corners, under the chair. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. She ran to the hearth. She grabbed the half-burnt log from the night before and used it to stir the embers, blowing on them, her hair falling in her face, her eyes wild. She threw on kindling, frantic, until a small, hungry flame sparked to life. She fell to her knees, crawling on the floor, gathering the coins. They were cold in her hand. "You will not!" she hissed, tears blurring her vision. "You will not buy me. You will not pay me off. I am not nothing." One by one, she threw the coins into the fire. The gold did not burn. It just sat in the flames, growing dull, then bright, absorbing the heat. She watched them, her teeth bared. She watched until the fire was roaring, and the coins were glowing red, like the eyes of a devil. Then she stood up, wiped her face, and picked up her rifle. She was alone again, truly alone, this time. The breaking began. She did not let her mind rest. To rest was to think. To think was to remember the coins. To think was to feel the pistol under her bed. So she worked. She declared war on the wilderness. She took to the woods, the rifle her only companion. She hunted with an obsessive, desperate focus. She shot rabbits, squirrels, even a small, thin deer, her hands steady, her eyes cold. She was a good shot. Her father had taught her. She skinned the animals with a grim efficiency, the blood on her hands a familiar, grounding feeling. She built traps, dozens of them, crude but effective snares and deadfalls, lining the canyon. She checked them twice a day, her movements fast, bordering on frantic. She smoked the meat, turning the cabin into a smokehouse, the smell acrid and thick. She was hoarding. She was preparing for a winter that was months away, preparing as if the end of the world was coming. She chopped wood until her hands blistered, then bled, then calloused over. She rebuilt the collapsed section of the fence, her muscles screaming, her breath sobbing. She did not sleep in the bed. She slept in the chair by the door, the rifle in her arms. She was trying to keep her mind from collapsing. She was trying to fill the terrible, echoing silence with the sounds of her own survival. But the silence was winning. Meanwhile, Silas rode into Selridge. The town was a main street of false-fronted buildings, a river of mud separating two plank sidewalks. It had a saloon, a general store, a marshal's office, and the husk of a burned-out bank building. He saw it immediately. Ashcroft National Bank. The sign was still there, hanging crooked. The letters faded. He left his horse at the livery and walked, his limp drawing stairs. The town was mean. He could feel it. It was not the honest grit of a frontier outpost. It was the mean-spirited, watchful silence of a place that feeds on its own. Men on the sidewalk stopped talking as he passed. Women in bonnets crossed the street to avoid him. They were not afraid of him. Not exactly. They were suspicious. He was a stranger. He went to the marshal's office first. It was empty. A layer of dust on the desk. A note on the door said, "Back Friday." He went to the saloon. It was the middle of the day, but the place was half full of men who had nothing better to do. He ordered a whiskey. The bartender, A heavy man with a dirty apron served him. Silas drank, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. He listened. Told him, if that railroad money don't come in, he can have his wire back. One man was saying, and she said it was her cousin, but I seen that drummer leave her house at dawn. The usual talk. He waited. Get you another? The bartender asked. Fill it, Silas said. He pushed a silver dollar across the bar. I'm looking for a man, name of Thorne. Elias Thorne. Might have come through here. The bartender's eyes narrowed. Bounty? Maybe. Ain't seen him. But I heard talk. Heard there was a shootout up in the canyon, by the old Spanish church. News traveled fast. That's so, Silas said, casual, taking a drink. So they say. The bartender grunted, wiping a glass. A drunk at the end of the bar, his face a ruin of broken veins, laughed. Church! That's where the devil lives. That's Ashcroft land. Cursed land. Silas turned his head slowly. That's where the girl lives. The drunk slurred, pointing a shaky finger at Silas. The Ashcroft witch. Bet you was up there. Bet you was visiting her. All the men go visit her. A low chuckle went around the bar. Silas looked at the man. You know her? I know of her, the drunk cackled. Proud Evelyn, too good for us, too good for Henry. Then her old man, pfft, traitor. And she was left with nothing but that cursed land. And her brother, that snake, James. He ran out on her, too. You know where James Ashcroft went? Silas asked, his voice quiet. The drunk's eyes turned mean. Why you askin'? You a friend of his? Just askin'. You leave James Ashcroft's name out of your mouth. The drunk snarled, trying to stand, his hand going to his hip. It was an empty gesture. He was too drunk to be a threat. He was no good. None of them were. That whole family, poison. Sit down, Jeb, the bartender warned. Silas turned back to his drink. He had what he needed. The town was poison. They had crucified her. He finished his whiskey, his mind on the ride back. He had to tell her. He had to tell her. What? That he was sorry, that she was right. He pushed himself off the bar, but the drunk, Jeb, was still muttering. And that's what he got. That Thorne. Played with the wrong fire, just like those bastards who burned the Ashcroft farm in the first place. Good riddance. Silas froze. His hand was on the door. He turned, very slowly. What did you say? The drunk looked up, confused. What? Silas walked back to him, his limp barely noticeable. He put his hand flat on the bar, looming over the man. What did you say about Thorne and the farm? I just said, Jeb stammered, frightened now. He used to ride with that gang, the ones who came through during the war, the ones who burned the Ashcroft farm, before the old man was even arrested. They said it was for the Union, but they were just raiders. Thorne was one of 'em, just a boy. But he was one of 'em. The saloon went quiet. Silas stared at the man, but he was not seeing him. He was seeing the ruined barn at Evelyn's homestead. He was seeing the terror in her eyes the first night. He was seeing the third man, the one who escaped the shootout at the church, Elias Thorne. Thorne, who had been part of the gang that burned her family's farm. Thorne, who knew that land. Thorne, who knew she was there. Thorne, who had seen Silas ride back to her cabin. Thorne, who was now a loose end, a man with a bounty on his head, who knew the one place Silas might be, or the one person he might have told. Silas grabbed the drunk by the shirt. The man who escaped, Thorne, did he come through here? No, I swear, Jeb whimpered. I ain't seen him. Silas let him go, shoving him back onto the stool. He threw another $1 on the bar. My apologies, friend. You've been a great help. He turned and walked out of the saloon, fast. The men watched him go, their gossip stilled. Silas did not run to the livery. He walked, his pace measured, but every step was tight with a cold, rising dread. He had left her. He had left her alone, in a cabin that her family's tormentor knew was there. He had left her after a fight, angry and grieving. He had left her money, like a fool, money Thorn might be looking for. He saddled his horse, his hands swift. He did not buy supplies. He did not go back to the marshal. He mounted the gelding and spurred it, hard, out of Selridge. He did not take the main trail. He cut across the valley, taking the hard, fast route over the ridges. He rode like a man hunted. He rode like a man who had just realized he'd left the only thing that mattered in a burning house. He was fast. He was desperate. But the sun was already low in the sky. He had spent too long in the town, too long wallowing in his own pride. He rode back toward the canyon, the cold dread in his stomach growing with every mile. He was too late. He knew it in his bones. He was too late. The sound that warned her was not a sound at all. It was the sudden silence of the woods. Evelyn was checking a snare line near the creek, her rifle cradled in her arms. She had been in the woods for hours, moving in a half-fugue state, her mind a dull ache. For days, she had done nothing but work, hunt, and fight the memories that clawed at her in the quiet. The memory of the gold, glowing in the fire. The memory of his horse, walking away. Now, the evening was settling, the light turning a weak, watery gray, and the birds had stopped. The squirrels were gone. The woods were holding their breath. She froze, her head lifting, sniffing the air. Wood smoke, but it was not her smoke. It was rank, greasy. She began to back away, moving slowly, stepping only on stone and damp earth. She kept to the trees, her eyes fixed on the small, dark shape of her cabin in the distance. A horse was tied to her porch rail, a bony, raw-backed roan she did not recognize. The cabin door was open. Her heart, which had felt like a cold stone for days, gave a single, violent lurch. She should run. She should take her rifle, her knife, and melt into the mountains. He had taught her that. No, she thought. A bitter twist in her gut. She had taught herself that. But the cabin, it was hers. It was all she had. And the man inside, he was an invader. Rage, cold and pure, washed over the fear. She moved, not toward the cabin, but to the side, circling, using the ruin of the barn for cover. She crept to the edge of the charred timbers, her knuckles white on the rifle stock. She could see onto the porch, into the open door. He was inside. She could hear him, the scrape of a boot, the thud of something heavy being overturned. Her table. She chambered around. The schlick-schlack of the Winchester was loud in the twilight. The movement inside stopped. "Well, now," a voice drawled. It was thin, reedy, a voice she had never heard. "Look at that. The little mouse has come home, and she's got a gun." A man stepped into the doorway. He was not Silas. He was thin, with a weasel-like face, covered in a patchy, dirty beard. His eyes were small, pale, and darted everywhere. He wore a filthy Union coat, too big for him, and a cavalry saber banged against his leg. He held a pistol in his hand, and it was aimed at her. It was Elias Thorn. "Drop the rifle, sweetheart," he said, smiling. The smile did not touch his eyes. "Drop it, or I'll put a hole in you right where you stand." Evelyn's rifle was steady. She had the bead right on his chest, but he was in her doorway. He was in her home. "Get out," she said, her voice low, shaking with a fury she had not known she possessed. "Oh, I'll get out," Thorn said. "Soon as I find what I'm looking for. Your man, the bounty hunter. He left his poke here, didn't he? I seen him. Watched him ride in here. Watched him ride out. He likes you, does he? Likes you enough to leave his gold?" Evelyn's blood went cold. "I don't know what you are talking about," she said, her voice clear. "Don't you?" Thorn laughed, a high, thin sound. He killed my friends, that bastard. Shot him down in that old church. He's got a bounty on me. And he's got their bounty money. $500 apiece. He left it with his girl. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Drop the rifle." He raised his pistol, aiming not at her chest, but at her head. Evelyn knew, in that instant, she could not win. He was too close. He was too fast. She could shoot him, but he would shoot her, too. Slowly, her fingers uncurling. She let the Winchester slip from her grasp. It landed softly in the mud. "Atta girl." Thorne grinned. He motioned with the pistol. "Inside. We got talking to do." She walked, her back straight, her head high. She stepped onto the porch, past him, into the violation of her home. He had wrecked it. The chair was on its side. Her blankets were torn from the bed, the mattress slashed. Her few tins of food were scattered on the floor. He had been looking. "Where is it?" he snapped, kicking the door shut behind him. The sound of the bar dropping was a hollow thud of doom. "I told you, I have nothing." "You're a liar," he said. He crossed the room in 2 strides and backhanded her. The force of the blow sent her staggering. She crashed into the wall, her head striking the logs. Her vision flared white, then dark. The coppery taste of blood filled her mouth. She spat. A dark gob of blood landed on the floor. She looked at him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a hatred so profound it burned away everything else. You were at the church," she whispered, her lips split and swelling. "That's right, and your man shot me, too. See?" He pulled up his coat, showing a festering, bloody bandage on his own thigh. "He shot me, but I'm tougher than he is. Where is he? He coming back for you?" "He's gone," Evelyn said, her voice thick. "He left. He's not coming back." "Good," Thorne said. "That makes this simple. The gold, where is it?" "There is no gold." He hit her again, this time with his fist. She fell to her knees, the pain exploding in her jaw. She cried out, a sharp, broken sound. "I ain't got time for this," he hissed. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. "I tore this place apart. Girl, it ain't here. So you tell me, did he bury it? Is it under the floor?" "No!" she gasped, tears of pain stinging her eyes. "Then where?" She was silent. She would not tell him. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing he was right. "Stubborn," he sneered. He shoved her, hard, toward the bed. "Fine, we'll wait." He found the rope she used to bundle firewood. He was fast, his movements practiced. He bound her wrists together, tight, the hemp biting into her skin. He looped the other end around the bedpost, pulling it taut, so she was forced to kneel. Her arms yanked back at a painful angle. "Now," he said, breathing hard, his small eyes bright. "We'll sit, and you'll think, and when you're ready to tell me, you just sing out." He went back to his search. He was not looking for a poke. He was looking for a hiding place. He kicked at the walls. He used his saber to pry at the floorboards, splintering the wood. He overturned the cold hearth, scattering ash and soot everywhere. Evelyn knelt, her arms screaming, the blood dripping from her mouth. She watched him. She was no longer a person. She was a trapped animal, watching the wolf tear her den apart. And then he found it. In the ash, something glinted. He knelt, his hand darting into the soot. He pulled one out, a gold double eagle, blackened by the fire. "Well, well, well," he whispered, his voice full of a sudden, dangerous joy. He dug through the ashes, his hands black, pulling out coin after coin. He piled them on the hearthstone. "In the fire. You tried to burn it. You stupid." He stood up, his face streaked with soot, twisting into a mask of pure rage. He had it, but she had tried to destroy it. "You tried to burn it!" he screamed. He stalked over to her, the melted, blackened coins clutched in his fist. He opened his hand, shoving the hot, greasy metal in her face. "You thought you could keep it from me?" "It was mine," she choked out. He laughed. "It's mine now. All of it?" He went to his saddlebag, which he'd thrown on the table, and dumped the coins inside. He was breathing hard, high and fast, excited by the find, by the violence. He turned, zipping the bag closed. He looked at her. She was kneeling, helpless, her dress torn at the shoulder from her fall. Her hair was loose, matted with mud and blood. Her eyes were defiant, black with hate. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. The cabin was silent, save for his breathing. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a soft, conversational tone that was more terrifying than his yelling. "This is your family's land, ain't it? Ashcroft." Evelyn said nothing. "I remember this place. From the war, me and some boys. We come through here. Your father, he was a rich man, a trader. We come to collect a tax." He smiled, remembering that barn. It burned real nice. Evelyn's heart stopped. "You," she whispered. "It was you." "I was just a boy," he shrugged. "But I remember. I remember your ma. She was a fine-looking woman, too, proud, just like you." He took a step toward her. "And now here you are, all alone. All that pride? And for what? Nothing." He knelt in front of her. She recoiled, pulling against the rope, but it held her fast. "Your bounty hunter. He paid you well," Thorne said, his eyes moving over her, slow, assessing. He reached out, his filthy hand touching her hair. Evelyn screamed. It was not a plea for help. It was a raw, primal sound of fury and violation. She lunged, trying to bite him. He laughed and grabbed her jaw, squeezing, his thumb pressing into the bruise. "Feisty, I like that." He let her go, and she slumped, panting, her eyes wild with terror. This was it. This was the end. She was going to die here, in the dirt, at the hands of the man who had helped destroy her family. "I've been on the trail a long time," he whispered, his voice thick. "A long, cold time. And finding this gold, it puts me in a mind to celebrate. And you're the celebration." He reached for the collar of her dress. "No!" she screamed. "No! I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" "You ain't killing no one," he said. He tore the fabric. The sound of the ripping cloth was louder than a gunshot. He was on her, his weight pressing her down, his hand over her mouth, muffling her screams. She fought, she bucked, kicked, thrashed, but he was heavy, and she was tied. The door exploded. It did not open. It was kicked from its hinges, slamming into the cabin floor with a crash that shook the walls. Silas Reeve stood in the doorway, a black silhouette against the dying light. His face was a mask of thunder. His Colt was in his hand. Thorne roared, scrambling off her, diving for his own pistol, which he'd left on the table. Silas did not shoot. He could not. Evelyn was too close. He lunged, crossing the room in 2 strides, his bad leg forgotten. He was not a bounty hunter. He was an avalanche. He hit Thorne with his whole body, a tackle that sent both men crashing into the table, splintering it. Thorne's pistol skittered away. It was not a fight. It was a butchering. Silas's hands were on Thorne's throat, his thumbs digging in. He roared, a sound from deep in his chest, the sound of a man who had seen his worst fear come true. He slammed Thorne's head against the floor. Once, twice. Thorne, smaller but wiry, writhed, his legs kicking. His hand found the saber still at his belt. He pulled it, a long, desperate scrape of steel. "Silas, the knife!" Evelyn screamed, struggling against the ropes. Silas saw the glint of metal. He rolled, just as Thorne thrust upward. The saber punched through the floorboards where Silas's chest had been. Silas came up, his pistol in his hand, but Thorn was too close. Thorn kicked him, hard, in the wounded thigh. Silas bellowed in pain, his leg collapsing. He went down. Thorn was on him, the saber raised high for a killing blow. "No!" Evelyn shrieked. Thorn grunted, his arm high. In that instant, his back was to the hearth. Silas, on the floor, his vision gray with pain, saw his opening. He aimed, not at the man, but beside him. He fired. The bullet missed Thorn. It struck the stone of the hearth. It sparked, and it found the small tin can of lantern oil that Thorn had overturned in his search. The oil puddled on the floorboards, soaking into the dry wood. It was not a fire, it was an explosion. A whoosh of blue flame erupted, climbing the wall, igniting the tattered blankets, the straw from the mattress. The cabin, old and dry as kindling, went up. Thorn screamed, his coat catching fire, and staggered back, beating at the flames. Silas, his leg on fire, dragged himself backward, his pistol still trained. "In hell, you bastard!" Silas grated. He shot Thorn in the chest. Thorn staggered, his eyes wide, the fire forgotten. He looked down at the hole. He looked at Silas. Silas shot him again. Thorn fell, crashing into the burning bed, and did not move. "Silas!" Evelyn was screaming. The rope that held her was smoking, the post behind her wreathed in flames. Silas tried to stand. His leg would not hold him. He looked down. In the chaos, in the fire, he had not felt it. Thorn's pistol, the one that had skittered away, it had gone off in the fall, or Thorn, in his scramble, had fired it. A dark, spreading stain was soaking his side, just under his ribs.
"Silas, you're shot!"
"The rope!" he gasped, crawling toward her. The smoke was thick, black, choking. The heat was unbearable. "Your hands!" He reached her, fumbling at his belt for his knife. His hands were shaking. He could not get the sheath open. "Hurry!" she choked, the smoke searing her lungs. He grabbed the burning end of the rope, ignoring the sizzle of his own flesh, and pulled. He put his boot against the bedpost and pulled with all his waning strength. The old wood, half burnt, snapped. Evelyn fell forward, free. She did not run, she grabbed him. "Get up!" "Can't," he slurred. The world was spinning. The smoke. "You will!" she screamed at him. She got her shoulder under his arm, the one that was not bleeding. "You will not die here. I will not let you." She dragged him, just as she had before, but now the world was on fire. The roof groaned, a timber falling, sending a shower of sparks. She pulled him, her feet slipping in his blood, her lungs burning. They reached the doorway, a square of dark, clean air. She fell forward, pulling him with her, tumbling down the porch steps, landing in the cold, wet mud. They lay there, side by side, gulping the night air. They were 10 feet from the inferno. Embers, bright and terrible, drifted down like snow. The cabin was a pillar of fire, roaring into the night sky, so bright it hurt to look at. Evelyn turned, coughing, her throat raw. She looked at Silas. He was pale, his eyes half closed. His hand was pressed to his side, but the blood was flowing thick and fast between his fingers. "No," she whispered. "No, not again." She put her hands over his, pressing down, trying to hold the life inside him. He opened his eyes. He looked at her. His gaze was clear. He reached up, his hand, blackened with soot, touching her face. His thumb wiped at the blood and ash on her cheek. "You're not cursed," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. Evelyn was weeping, her body shaking with sobs, with the aftermath of terror, with the shock. "Silas!" He clutched her hand. He held it tight. "You're the strongest damn woman I've ever met." He said it like a final judgment, like a truth. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her own torn and bleeding. She looked at him, the man who had left her, the man who had come back, the man who had, for the second time, fallen on her land. They lay in the dirt and the ash, bloodied and broken, but alive, together. In the distance, the cabin roof fell in, a great, sighing crash. A fountain of sparks shot up, illuminating the ruined barn, the broken fence, the empty clearing. Everything was gone, again. She held his hand, pressed her cheek to his, and watched the last of her old life burn to the ground. They left the fire to die in the mud. There was nothing to salvage. The ashes of the cabin were a black, sodden wound in the clearing. Even the coins Silas had left, the coins Evelyn had thrown into the fire, were gone, melted into slag, buried under the collapsed chimney. Evelyn found her rifle in the mud where she had dropped it. The stock was cracked. She found Silas's pistol, empty, near the fallen doorway. His horse, the gray gelding, stood trembling by the tree line, where it had fled from the fire. Thorne's horse was gone, bolted at the first sound of gunfire. They had one horse, one pistol, one broken rifle. They had the clothes on their backs, stiff with mud and blood. Silas was a dead weight. The bullet in his side had been a glancing shot, tearing through muscle and flesh, but it had not pierced his lung. It had, however, opened the wound in his thigh, which was weeping blood again. He was pale, shivering, and losing consciousness. Evelyn, her hands raw from the rope, her throat scorched from the smoke, became the center. She was no longer a victim. She was not a survivor. She was a force. She used Thorne's saber, the one that had been his undoing, to cut strips from her own petticoat. She packed the wound in Silas's side, binding it tight, her movements sure, her hands no longer shaking. She tended his leg. She did not weep. She worked. She got him onto the horse. It took everything she had. Her shoulder braced against his good side, her arms wrapped around his waist, lifting, pushing, grunting with the effort until he was slumped over the saddle horn, groaning. She looked at the ruin one last time, the place of her shame, her isolation, and, strangely, her rebirth. She felt nothing. It was just burned wood. She took the reins, and she walked south. They traveled for 2 days in a blur of pain. Evelyn walked, leading the horse, Silas rocking in the saddle, delirious with fever. She did not know where she was going. She was just moving away, away from Selridge, away from the canyon, away from the past. She hunted. She took the broken rifle and, holding the stock together with one hand, managed to shoot a grouse. She fed the broth to Silas, forcing it between his cracked lips. She cleaned his wounds with cold creek water and rags torn from her dress. She slept, when she slept at all, sitting up, her back against the horse's legs, the pistol in her lap. On the 3rd day, Silas woke. His eyes were clear. "Evelyn," he rasped. She was there, wringing out a cloth. She looked at him. "Where?" "South," she said. "I do not know." He looked at his side. The bandage was clean. He looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair matted, her lips split. Her hands were bandaged with her own rags. "You," he started. "Be quiet," she said, her voice rough, but not unkind. "You need to rest. I will find us a place." He said nothing. He just watched her. He watched her check the load in the pistol. He watched her test the stock of the broken rifle. He watched her lead his horse forward, her back straight, her shoulders set. He closed his eyes, not in fever, but in a strange, terrifying surrender. He, who had never trusted anyone, was now as helpless as a child, and he was not afraid. They found the valley on the 5th day. They topped a low ridge, the horseshoe-pocked trail giving way to granite. Below them, a small, circular valley opened up, hidden from the world by high, pine-covered walls. A stream, clean and bright, cut through the middle of it. Old, broad-limbed cottonwood trees followed the water, their leaves just beginning to unfurl in the spring green. It was quiet. It was the quiet of a place that had never seen violence. It was untouched. "Here," Evelyn said. She stopped the horse. Silas lifted his head. He looked down at the green, sheltered land. It was a bowl of peace. "Here," he agreed. It took them a week to get him down the slope. He was weak, his leg and side a constant, burning fire. She made a camp under the largest of the cottonwoods, a low-hanging canopy of new leaves. For the first time in his life, Silas Reeve was useless. He sat with his back against the tree, his pistol at his side, and watched. He watched Evelyn. He watched her move. She was no longer the pale, haunted woman of the cabin. She was not the raging, grieving woman who had thrown his coins in the fire. She was someone new. She was hard. She was practical. She was tireless. She hunted. She fished in the stream with a line she made from horsehair. She found wild onions and dug up the roots of sago lilies, her hands raw from the digging. She fed him. She tended his wounds. She worked from sunup to sundown, and when she fell asleep, it was the instant, bottomless sleep of true exhaustion. When he was strong enough to stand, they began to build. It was not a cabin. It was a shelter. They found a low cliff face, a shallow overhang that would keep off the worst of the rain. They had no axe. They had Thorn's saber and her father's old skinning knife. They worked together. He, with his one good leg and one good arm, would brace the saplings. She, with her lean, tough strength, would cut and haul. They wove a lattice of willow branches, plugging the gaps with mud and sod. They did not talk much. The work was too hard. The language was in the passing of a branch, the shared grunt of lifting a rock. He learned the rhythm of her breathing. She learned the way he bit his lip when his side pained him. It was a rough, ugly thing. Their shelter. It was half dugout, half lean-to, but they built it together. When it was done, they stood back. The sun was setting, turning the valley purple. "It will hold," Silas said. Evelyn nodded, wiping mud from her cheek. "Yes, it will hold." They moved inside. They had a bed of pine boughs, covered with his saddle blanket. It was not much. It was everything. The next week, Silas made a decision. He was well enough to walk, his limp heavy, but he was mobile. "I am going to town," he said one morning. Evelyn went still. She was cleaning a fish by the stream. She looked up, her face guarded, her hand on her knife. "Town? There must be one near," he said. "South, a trading post, something." "Why?" Her voice was flat. "We need an axe," he said, "and flour, and seed, and a mule, if I can get one." "We have no money," she said. The word money was a cold, sharp thing between them. Silas picked up his rifle, the Winchester, the one he had used to kill the men at the church. He ran his hand over the smooth, worn stock. It was his trade. It was his life. It was his curse. He looked at Evelyn. "I am selling this." Her eyes widened. She stared at the rifle, then at him. "Silas, that is your rifle." "It is a tool," he said, "and it is not the tool I need anymore." He left. He took the horse and the rifle and was gone for 3 days. Evelyn stayed in the valley. She did not know if he would return. She had his pistol, and she had the saber. She worked. She set snares. She dug. She did not let herself watch the ridge. On the 3rd evening, she heard a sound, a hee-haw that echoed off the canyon walls. He came over the ridge. He was riding the gelding, and behind him, tethered by a rope, was a small, dusty mule. The mule was loaded with sacks. Evelyn dropped the roots she was washing. She ran, her feet bare, up the slope. He dismounted, his face grim with exhaustion. He looked terrible, But he was back. "You came back," she breathed. "I came back," he said. He untied the sacks, an axe head, a sack of flour, salt, a heavy bag of potatoes for planting, a new, sturdy wool blanket, and, at the bottom, a small, paper-wrapped parcel. He handed it to her. She opened it. It was a pair of men's canvas trousers and a new wool shirt. Practical, sturdy. She looked at them, then at him, her throat thick. "Thank you," she whispered. "The rifle," he said, looking at his hands. It brought a good price." He had sold the hunter, the bounty man. He had sold his past for a future. "And this," he said. He pulled one last thing from his saddlebag. It was not a rifle. It was a heavy, double-barreled shotgun. Short, practical. For meat," he said, not meeting her eyes. "For meat," she agreed. It was a homestead gun, a protection gun, not a hunting gun. Their life began. It was a hard life. The land did not give up its bounty easily. They cleared a small patch near the stream, the sound of the new axe ringing in the quiet valley. They broke the earth with sharp sticks in their bare hands. Evelyn planted the potatoes and the wild onions she had transplanted. Silas, his leg healing, his side a long, puckered scar, hunted. He took the shotgun and brought back rabbits, quail. He never went far. He never stayed gone overnight. They fell into a quiet rhythm. They were two broken people, tending a small, hard patch of land. They were partners. But the nights were where the past lived. Evelyn would wake, gasping, her hands flailing. She was fighting him. Thorn. His hands on her. The smell of him. The sound of her dress ripping. She would come awake, screaming, her nails clawing at the blanket. And Silas would be there. He would not grab her. He would just put his hand on her shoulder. "You are here, Evelyn. You are safe. He is gone. I am here." She would turn, then, and bury her face in his chest, her body shaking with sobs that were dry and old. He would hold her, his large hand stroking her tangled hair, his own body rigid. He would hold her until the shaking stopped, until her breathing evened out, until she was asleep again, her hand fisted in his shirt. And he had his own demons. He would wake, bolt upright, his hand reaching for a gun that was not there. He was in the fire. He was choking on smoke. He was reaching for Sarah, her hand slipping from his grasp. He was watching the cabin burn. Evelyn tied to the post. He would groan, a low sound of animal pain, and sit on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Evelyn would wake. She would not speak. She would just sit beside him. She would put her small, calloused hand on his back, on the network of old scars. And then, one night, she did more. She moved in front of him. She knelt. She looked at his chest, at the old, white lines, and at the new, raw scar on his side, and she leaned forward and gently kissed the scar. Silas flinched, a sharp intake of breath. It was the most intimate touch he had ever known. More intimate than any physical act. It was acceptance. It was a healing. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a decade of pain. She did not look away. She put her hand on his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. He pulled her to him, and they lay down. Not in passion, but in a deep, shared exhaustion. They held each other, two scarred and broken things, and in the holding, they found a kind of peace. The summer passed. The potatoes grew. The valley was good to them. They were almost happy. One afternoon, in the late summer, Evelyn was by the stream, washing their clothes, when she heard it. A horse, not theirs, coming down the trail. She stood, wiping her wet hands on her canvas trousers. Silas came out of the shelter, the shotgun in his hand, held low. A man rode into the clearing. He was tall, wearing a dusty coat and a badge, a United States Marshal. He stopped his horse, his eyes taking in the scene, the small, rough shelter, the woman, standing by the stream, her hair cut short for practicality, the man, scarred, limping, holding a shotgun. "Afternoon," the marshal said. His voice was tired. "Marshal," Silas said. He did not raise the gun. He just held it. "I'm looking for a man," the marshal said. "Name of Silas Reeve, bounty hunter. You fit the description. What's left of it?" Silas said nothing. His face was granite. Evelyn moved. She walked from the stream, her feet bare, and stood beside Silas. She stood not behind him, but next to him. She put her hand on his arm. "Who are you, sir?" she asked, her voice clear, strong. "U.S. Marshal Henry Stokes. I got a warrant for Silas Reeve. A killing, back in Missouri, 10 years ago. A saloon fight. Man died." Silas's eyes closed. Just for a second. The past, it had found him. "He is not going with you," Evelyn said. The marshal looked at her. His eyes were not unkind. "Ma'am, that is not your decision. Step aside." "No," Evelyn said. She stepped, not aside, but in front of Silas. She stood between the marshal and the man she loved. "His name is Silas," she said, her voice ringing in the quiet valley. "I do not know about Missouri. I do not care. I know that he came to my cabin when I was alone. I know that he saved me from a man who came to harm me. The man who burned my family's farm. Silas killed him. He was shot. Twice. He almost died. Saving me." She pointed to the shelter. "He built that. He planted those crops. This man," she put her hand on Silas's chest, on his heart, "is a farmer. He is not the man you are looking for. That man is dead. He burned up in the fire that took my home. You cannot have this one. I will not let you." The marshal looked at her, at the absolute, unshakable certainty in her eyes. He looked at the man behind her. He saw the scars, the fresh one on his side, barely healed, the old one on his shoulder, the terrible, puckered burn on his thigh. He saw the limp. He saw the hands, not a gunman's hands, but a working man's, calloused and stained with dirt. He saw the shotgun, held not in aggression, but in defense of her, of this. The marshal sat on his horse for a long, silent minute. He looked at the warrant in his hand. He looked at the man who was, and the man who had been. He sighed, a long, dusty breath. 10 years is a long time, the marshal said, mostly to himself. He folded the paper. "And this description, it's not a good match. The man I am looking for, he wouldn't be this easy to find, or this hard to take." He put the warrant back inside his coat. "My apologies for disturbing you, ma'am, sir." He tipped his hat. He turned his horse and rode, slow and steady, back up the trail and out of their lives. Evelyn did not move until the sound of the hoofbeats was completely gone. Then her legs gave out. She sagged, not falling, but leaning back against Silas, who caught her. He held her, his arms wrapped around her, his face buried in her short hair. He was shaking. That night, there were no nightmares. They lay under their new wool blanket. The quiet of the valley was absolute. The war was over. The hunt was done. Silas pulled her close. The shotgun was leaning against the wall, just beside the bed, a tool, not a threat. Evelyn turned in his arms. She looked at him in the pale moonlight that spilled into their shelter. She saw his face. The lines of pain eased. The hardness softened. She put her hand on his chest. "Take everything I have," she whispered. It was not the desperate, broken plea of that first night in the storm. It was not a bargain. It was not a surrender. It was a statement. It was a gift. "It is yours now," she said. Silas looked into her eyes, and he saw his own reflection. He saw the man he was, not the man he had been. He bent his head and kissed her. In the moonlight, They lay together beneath a threadbare blanket. They were not rich. They were not, perhaps, ever truly safe. But they were no longer alone. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from so you can connect with others. We invite you to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in English.